Hey PowerWatters, Coach Flex is here and Coach Mark from PowerWatts West Island, and welcome to our first Q&A session. So thanks for joining us, and thank you for all of your questions from the emails, Facebook, Instagram, and in person. We're very excited. Mark's very excited to answer them today.
Yeah, I was really curious to hear what you guys wanted to know, things that don't necessarily come up during class. So I wanted to make sure that I answered as many of your questions as possible today. And
they were all great questions. So let's get into it.
Yeah, let's jump right in. Let's see what we got.
So the first question is an email question from me and Jean. And it's, Mark, you used to start every workout by telling us a joke. Can you start the Q&A with a joke?
Oh, okay. So the story behind this is Sabrina, my wife, asked me to tell her a joke every day at one point. So the joke that I was telling her every day, I decided to tell the joke to the PowerWatts riders. So anyhow, let's go with a joke to start with. So a tandem rider is stopped by a police officer. So the tandem rider says, "Oh, excuse me, sir, did I do anything wrong?" And the police officer said, "Perhaps you didn't notice, but your wife fell off the bike about half a mile back." And the guy replied, "Oh, thank God, I thought I was going deaf." I can imagine Big Daddy and my mother on the bike, and my mother flies off the back, and Big Daddy thinking he lost his hearing.
Or Macho Man and Queen of Extreme.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
like man. But the Macho Man would have to fall off the bike in that case. So I hope you guys enjoyed that little joke to start with. So thank you for the question, Mean Jean.
Yeah, great question. And hopefully you can start saying that as telling jokes at the start of each PowerWatts.
Well, that's putting a lot of pressure on me, Flexus, but I'll see what I can do.
We gotta make Mean Jean happy.
Yeah.
So the next question is from the Tom Giuliano, and he asked this in class. So with the recent legalization of marijuana, do you and Paulo smoke big doobies before setting up the workouts? Because it sure seems that way.
Oh. The Tom Giuliano. What a guy.
Yeah. Okay, but the actual question is about the intensity.
Okay, I was worried for a second there.
It seems like the workout intensities make no sense this season. So what's up with that?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question, actually. So when most riders walk into the PowerWatts room, the first thing they do is they look at the intensity that's written right above the workout profile. And so sometimes we have intensities of around 80%. Sometimes they go as high as 85, 86%. However, this season we've added new elements into the workouts that make sometimes the intensities appear much higher than they are and the intensities appear much lower than they really are. So I'll get into that first in a moment, just so you guys understand a little bit what this intensity factor is all about. There's something called normalized power. So normalized power is a concept that was developed by the founders of Training Peaks. So the idea of normalized power is to give you an idea of the physiological cost of riding at a certain power output. So maybe an example, it might be a little bit easier to understand that. So I'll just put it on the board. So let's say we have an example where you ride for 3 minutes at 100% watts. Okay. So when you do that, at the end of the 3 minutes, your average power will be 100% if you actually follow the workout prescription. Tom Giuliano usually does it. He usually goes way above, but that's a whole different story. Then say if we do another 3-minute effort, but the 3 minutes we alternate between 15 seconds at 50% and 15 seconds at 150%. So if we look at the end of this 3 minutes, the average watts is also equal to 100%. But anybody that has a certain amount of experience riding PowerWatts will know that this effort here is much more challenging than this effort here, despite the fact that the average watts is the same. So if we looked at these efforts and actually calculated the normalized power, which is used to determine the intensity of a drill, the intensity of this first one, because the power output is super steady, the intensity actually ends up also being 100%. Whereas this one, the 3-minute effort, when we do the calculation, the intensity of this effort actually ends up being 126.5%. So what does that mean? that means doing the 3 minutes, alternating between 50% and 150% every 15 seconds is the equivalent of riding for 3 minutes straight at 126.5% physiologically in your muscles. So when we talk about the intensity of the workouts, we're not talking about the average power. We're talking about this special calculation of intensity. So the workout profile, when you look at it, it takes all the intervals that we have set up for that particular day and then does the calculation to get the actual intensity. However, this season we've introduced many new elements that kind of break the calculation of intensity as it kind of currently works. So we're going to have to come up with a better way to calculate the intensity. Now let's go over some of the things that break the intensity factor. So one example is when we have minimum wattage targets. So the example of that is, say if we say, okay guys, we're going to do 30 seconds at over 120%. When we do this, the workout profile that's used to calculate the intensity assumes you do exactly 120%. But anybody that has done a minimum wattage target drill, they always end up going 125, 128, 130%. So they actually end up going, say, 10% higher than the actual target. So imagine if we had 5 or 10 or 15 of those intervals, the intensity of the workout might indicate like 80%. However, if you go 10% over on all of these, that might pull up the intensity to 85, 86%. So you say, oh, this workout's actually not going to be that bad, looking at the intensity value, but then it ends up becoming very, very difficult. So minimum targets, that's new this season, so that really throws off the intensity. Another thing that throws off the intensity this year is the tap intervals that we've introduced. Yes. So the tap intervals, that's when we have a minimum wattage target, but you just have to shoot above it. The reason, though, that the taps throw off the intervals is an example of a tap interval is we'd say we'd have 1 minute, and we'd say you got to do 6 times tap. We use the up arrow symbol like this for a tap over, say, 175%. In the workout profile thinks that for the whole minute, you're holding over 175%. It doesn't realize that you're just tapping over it 6 times. So you just touch above 175 and go below, touch above and go below. So this will actually make the intensity of the workout appear higher than it really is. So this one makes the workout intensity appear lower than it really is. This one makes the workout intensity appear higher than it really is. So let's look at another example. So another example of a drill is, say if we do 1 minute and we do delta battery, our new battery thing. Say if we say delta battery minus 10%. Every person in class will have to put out a different power output in order to drain their battery by 10%, because we calculate the battery values for each rider individually. So during the class, the workout profile has no idea what each individual rider needs to do to drain the battery by minus 10%. So the workout intensity in this case, whenever there's drain the battery drills, is going to be lower than it really is, typically much lower than it really is. So that's another example. And the last example that we have used in the past is like a law of averages drill. So for example, that's where you do 1 minute, say at 90%, and then you do 1 minute average 100%, where we don't reset the average watts in between, and you have to take your average from 90% up to 100%. Now to do that, in the second minute, you have to hold 110% watts. But the workout profile thinks you're holding 100% watts, because that's the target that's in the gauge. And the workout profile does not know that we have reset, and we did not reset the average watts in between. So here ends up being similar to a situation like this, where you have to do 10 or 20 or 30% higher than the actual target to pull your average up. So in this case, the intensity appears lower than it really is. So nowadays, when you come into the PowerWatts room, you can't really trust the intensity scores. We will come up with our own algorithm in order to calculate the intensity. But when you look at the intensity factor, and if it looks unusually high or unusually low, ask the coach, hey, are we doing minimum targets today? Are we doing drain the battery? Are we doing law of averages if the intensity factor looks really low? And if the answer is yes, you could be sure that it's going to be harder than you expect. And if the intensity is really high, you can ask your coach, hey, are we doing taps today? And then if you see an intensity of like 94% for the workout, you don't have to worry. It's because the tap intervals are in there, so the intensity is really going to be lower than what it appears in the workout profile.
Interesting.
So that answers the Tom Giuliano's question. So it has nothing to do with smoking doobies. It has to do with the fact that Paulo and myself and other PowerWatts coaches were innovating new ideas that break the current algorithms that people use in order to calculate the intensity of the workouts. But one day, like I mentioned, we will catch up, or actually innovate, I should say, our own method of calculating these intensities. So hopefully that answers your question, Tom Giuliano. And no, we do not smoke doobies.
No.
We believe in a drug-free life here at PowerWatts.
That was a great question.
Yeah, it was an interesting question. Only the Tom Giuliano.
Only the Tom Giuliano. Great.
So what do we got next, Flexus?
So the next question is from Big Daddy.
Okay.
It's a Facebook question. And he asked, how does PowerWatts come up with all the challenging training variations?
Okay, so that actually kind of follows some of these things. Okay, so you know what? Let's first start with how we came up, say, with the stage race, because the stage race has a lot of different elements in it. So it has a target, it has the aggressive rider, king of the mountain, king of the downhill, and it has the sprint, of course, and the fastest finisher. So a couple of years ago, so Paulo and myself, and one other person, his name is Nick. So Nick does a lot of the coding for us, and he really helps us actually innovate a lot of new ideas. So we were all sitting around saying, okay, we want to create a new event, because in the past all we did was the 20-minute time trial and the hill climb. So we want to innovate a new event that really has something in it for everybody at PowerWatts. Because the 20-minute time trial, it's really the people that like those long, sustained, hard efforts. The hill climb, it's the people with the really high watts per kilo that really do well on that one. We wanted something that everybody had something that they can thrive in. So we're kind of shooting ideas around. So Paulo, first thing he shot out there was the idea of the target segment. So the target segment, that's where you got to get your average watts and your average cadence exactly equal to the target. We calculate to 4 decimal places the accuracy, and that one, out of all the elements in the stage race, is the one that is the most competitive across all the PowerWatts centers. So, and the other reason that we have the target in there too is it makes it more fun and more interesting when there's a cadence target that's attached to an interval. Because oftentimes in an interval, there's a cadence target attached, and some people enjoy the cadence targets, other people hate the cadence targets. But right away, when you add a target segment and a little competition, friendly competition, then people all of a sudden start working their gearing and working their cadence a little bit better. And the podium, of course, and the podium. So then the second element, as part of that, was the one that we all agreed on right away was King of the Mountain, because that's the most common one, in all the, Strava and, King of the Mountain and the Tour de France, the polka dot jersey, all that stuff. But then the other one we said, well, King of the Mountain, that's really for people that have a high watts per kilo, because their weight is pretty low and their power is really high. So Paulo was saying, well, what about the guys who have the really high power but the heavier weight? So that's where the idea of the King of the Downhill came in, because the high power, high weight riders, they're not going to win the King of the Mountain, but it ends up becoming really competitive in the King of the Downhill. And it actually ends up being very challenging too, because the heavier you are and the higher power you are, the higher the cadence that you have to use. And a lot of these riders didn't enjoy using a higher cadence. So it becomes a fun way, fun, because it's very challenging in the King of the Downhill, to get people to practice the higher cadence and be competitive for the high power, heavier riders. And the other element that we were discussing was, how are we going to reward riders that are aggressive? I mean, it ended up becoming the aggressive rider segment, because there's a jersey in the Tour de France for the most combative rider. So the rider in the previous day's stage that, say, does the most courageous thing might be an early attack, and they end up, say, 200 kilometers alone, and then they just get gobbled up by the pack in the final couple hundred meters for the sprinters to sprint for the finish. So the Tour de France would award the most combative jersey to that guy that had the guts to do that solo breakaway. So we wanted something so that somebody who had the guts to go hard early or in the middle of the stage race gets rewarded for it. So, and the other thing that we wanted to get with the aggressive rider segment is we also wanted to reward the riders who have that really high anaerobic capacity. So like the people that come from a team sports background, hockey players and stuff like that, who are really explosive, who can put out a really high power but haven't quite developed that endurance yet. So that's why we anchored it on percent watts, because the percent watts is the rider who has that highest anaerobic capacity, can go the highest percentage above their actual endurance. So that's where the idea for the aggressive rider came from. And the sprints, you know, we just want to reward a sprinter. We thought about whether we were going to do it with just pure watts or if we were going to do it with watts per kilo. We decided to go with watts per kilo so that lighter riders weren't penalized because heavier riders naturally can put more torque, more force into the pedals. And then the fastest finisher, that was naturally to put in there, especially for the people that really like the 20-minute time trial. They just want to get to the end of the stage as fast as possible, not doing all those other elements. So that's how we innovated the different stage race elements, kind of on a roundtable discussion.
Sorry guys, we had a bit of a video interruption, so we're going to get back to Big Daddy, the question that Big Daddy asked, which is how we come up with different training variations.
Yeah, great. So we had the time to discuss how we came up with the stage race. So let's just go over how we came up with some of these other ideas as part of the training. So the battery, for example, let's look at that one. So Paulo is always up to date on all the most recent physiological research and literature because he is an exercise physiologist by trade. So he stays up to date with journal articles, and sometimes he sends them out to us to read and everything. So that's where the battery concept actually came from. It was developed by a physiological researcher called Dr. Phil Skiba, and so he used some data that he had accumulated on riders to try to estimate, you know, how much anaerobic capacity a rider's actually draining by going to certain power outputs, and he came up with some algorithms to calculate it. So he said, oh wow, that's a really cool element that we can add into CPX and the PowerWatts program. So we added it in, and we actually took Dr. Phil Skiba's algorithm. We had to modify it a little bit based on our experience. We had the luxury of having a lot more data samples than he did with all of our PowerWatts riders at all the centers. So we modified the algorithm a little bit to what we feel really matches the amount of battery that you drain. And now it's a big part of the PowerWatts program. You see battery drain intervals several times over the first 10 weeks of training, and you're going to see it more in the second half of the training as well. So that idea, again, came from physiological researchers. So another place where a lot of the ideas come from, at least at first, so for example, where the TAP one came from at first, is Paulo works with a lot of professional riders. And so say when you're a professional rider and you're riding in a big peloton, you're often not pedaling. So you're just kind of coasting. But then you might come out of a corner, or you might start a downhill or something like that. And all of a sudden you have to accelerate like ridiculously hard, and then you coast again. Then you have to accelerate, you coast again, you accelerate, coast again. So what he developed was these intervals called hit and sit intervals, where he'd tell riders, okay, get up to a certain speed, and then pop up to this power, and then right away sit back down. Stand up, get to this power, sit back down. To develop that really fast twitch explosive ability in the context of already kind of rolling at a faster speed. So we took that idea and then created the TAP intervals. So TAP stands for touch above power, where we give a power target and the rider just got to go above it and then back down, go above it and back down. So that's where that idea came from. So experience with the demands, say, of the professional riders that Paulo works with. And then other elements that we add in, say like the time and zone, or like the law of averages, it's to take normal mundane efforts, say riding at 85%, 90%, and actually make them interesting. And not only make them interesting, develop specific skill sets that are important for riders to develop. So you hear a lot of talk about how it's better to ride really smooth. That's a kind of explained a bit. If you go back to this example, the closer you are to riding steady, you know, the lower the intensity ends up being. You know, if you, like, these are two extreme examples, but the steadier that you could be on your power, typically the lower the total physiological cost of it is. So especially on triathlon forums or triathlon articles, it talks about learning how to be pretty smooth with your power output. So we wanted a way to actually teach people how to do that. So that's what the time and zone is. So we first added the window around any wattage target on the gauge. And then after that, the following year, we put in the time and zone so that people like really hone in and really focus on it. And it's amazing the improvement that we've seen. Some riders used to always be blue, red, and now they're actually like really dialed in the green, actually winning time and zone intervals, which is really exciting. So we actually developed the way to improve that particular skill. You can't really do that anywhere else because you don't have the wattage window, you don't have the time and zone intervals. So that's one of the reasons that the time and zone was in there, realizing we want to make it fun and the needs of the riders themselves based on our experience with all the athletes that we work with. Also, the minimum target, that one we decided to put in there because in previous years, we had a lot of riders that would just get like tons of exclamation points. Maybe you remember that riders would get exclamations after exclamations because they would always go over the wattage targets because they had a little bit more anaerobic power than, say, somebody else. But if we want to condition the anaerobic system, really, we don't need to set an exact target. We just have to set a minimum target. If you go over this value, and you can do 122%, you can do 125, you can do 130%, self-selected, that's going to get the level of anaerobic conditioning that we need people to get. So that's where this came from. So people get much fewer exclamations now, but they actually get a better training effect with this minimum wattage target, especially also the riders that used to go way in the red and then they'd go in the blue for a while and say, oh yeah, now my average is 120. Yeah, yeah, exactly. We won't name names. So now it's like, yeah, let's go over 120. We don't care what your average ends up being. Just keep your current watts always in the green, and that way we don't get that big drop off. So that's where that idea came from. So just to sum it up, sometimes the ideas come from roundtable discussions. Sometimes the ideas like this one come from the physiological research that we try to stay up to date with. Ideas like, for example, this one come from the needs or demands of professional cycling and the riders that Paulo works with. And then other ideas come from our experience with riders like time and zone like this and how to develop particular skill sets that the riders need. So hopefully that answers your question, Big Daddy, and hopefully you found that interesting. But thank you for the question.
Very interesting. Yeah. So the next question is from Killer.
From Killer.
Facebook question, and she asked, why do we use 20-minute power as the base training power rather than 5 minute, 10-minute, or 3-minute?
Okay. So first of all, when we do our training, we do use multiple different training intensities. So sometimes we've been anchored on 5 or 10-second power. Sometimes you're anchored on 1-minute power. But I think what Killer's referring to is whenever we say do like endurance efforts, we could do it based on 5-minute power, 10-minute power, 20-minute power, 30-minute power. So why do we always stick to 20 minutes? So the short answer to that is, so we've been doing workout creations now for 15 years. I've been doing 10 of those 15 years. We've been creating workouts, and that's what we've always used. We've always used 20-minute power. 15 years ago, it was rare for people to use 20-minute power. Oftentimes, riders would be subjected to 60-minute tests, and then they'd have to say, what was your power for 60 minutes? And then we'd anchor it on that. But when we're doing 60-minute tests, there's all sorts of other factors and variables that can come into play. I mean, even 20-minute power testing is a bit challenging, so you can imagine 60-minute power testing. So we've always used the 20-minute power, and sometimes we used to do it on a rolling hill course. Now we do it on an uphill course. So the fact that we've used it so long, we've really been able to hone our workouts into what percentage intensities develop, what particular skill elements, or what particular energy systems that we have to develop, because we have so much experience with that 20-minute power. Now, another reason that we use it also is because we like to do the 20-minute time trial. So it's not just all of a sudden some number that you pull out of a hat. It's like, you've achieved this on your 20-minute, so we're actually going to put it in there. There's other values, say like that people might use, like an FTP. So FTP is roughly 90 to 95% of your best 20-minute power. So usually what somebody would do for FTP is they would do a 20-minute test, and they would take, say, 95% of that value and assign it to their FTP and do their training on that. Or they would just do a bunch of workouts, and some algorithm would try to determine what the person's FTP is. We wanted to stick to like actual results that people achieved, so that people really understand it's not just some concept of FTP. It's like, what can you do for 20 minutes, just to make it a little bit clearer on what it actually is. But as many riders know, sometimes we take some riders and we lower their 20-minute power. Other riders, we raise their 20-minute power a little bit based on coaching experience. But that's one of the reasons that we go with, say, 20-minute power versus some of the other ones. Why do we use 20-minute instead of, say, 5-minute? Because when we do a 5-minute power test, the anaerobic contribution to the 5-minute power test is a little bit higher. So we have certain riders who haven't quite fully developed their endurance yet, but they have that big anaerobic engine. So they'll end up with a really high 5-minute score. So then if we anchored all the power on their 5-minute scores, they would be training anaerobically a little bit too much. And then whenever we get to, say, a 20-minute power test, and a lot of you probably know this, a lot of riders at 8 minutes or at 12 minutes, they hit a bit of a lull, and because that's basically the limit of a large anaerobic contribution to an effort, 8 minutes, 12 minutes-ish. So if someone's always training at slightly too high of a power because we anchored it on their 5-minute power, then they're never going to develop that ability to kind of get over the hump at the 8-minute, at the 12-minute mark on the 20-minute time trial. Whereas if we do a 20-minute time trial, the anaerobic contribution is much smaller, so we're getting a much better idea of what the true threshold capacity is of somebody. So if they go a little bit above that, the level of difficulty gets exponentially higher, whereas if they're a little bit below it, they can sustain it for an extended period of time. So that's more true for your best 20-minute than it is for your best 5-minute. Now, why don't we use 30 minutes? It kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier about people who used to be subjected to 60-minute tests, never in the PowerWatts program, but in other programs. So we don't really want to subject riders to more than a 20-minute continuous effort, because once we start to go beyond that, we already see at 8 minutes, 12 minutes, some people run into trouble because they just don't have the experience yet, or the training time to develop their aerobic and their threshold system to go the whole 20. So if we start doing it at 30 minutes, I think the power outputs that we'd be getting for riders would be a little bit too low, and then we wouldn't be providing enough training stimulus to certain riders, especially highly anaerobic riders wouldn't be getting enough training stimulus. A really strong endurance rider, their 20-minute and 30-minute power would be almost identical, but other riders, there'd be a massive drop-off, because we already see a big drop-off, like I mentioned before, at 8 and 12 minutes. So that's where the 20-minute choice comes from. However, that being said, we could give somebody a 30-minute test, we can give someone a 10-minute test, we can give someone a 5-minute test, and using all the data that we've accumulated from all the PowerWatts riders, and knowing a little bit about the background of that rider, we can take your 5-minute best and very accurately estimate your 10-minute best, your 20-minute best, your 30-minute best. The difficulty with that is the estimates aren't going to be the same for every rider in the program. So one rider might be able to do 125% of his 20-minute power for 5 minutes. Another rider can only do 117%. If I know that rider's history and what their power curve looks like, what their power output looks like on the shorter end of the scale for 10, not 10, but like 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, I can accurately estimate their 20-minute. But we can't use the same algorithm for each rider. So each rider, it would have to be done a little bit differently. So that's why we just kind of stick to that 20 minutes. Everyone understands what it means, 100%. You can do this for 20 minutes nonstop. It starts off feeling pretty comfortable, but then gets very difficult near the end. So that's why we use 20-minute power. I could go on and on about that. Killer, if you want to know more of the reasoning behind that, let me know, and in our next Q&A I can dive even deeper into that, but hopefully that answered your question enough for today. So thank you so much for that question, Killer. Very interesting question.
Interesting. And we can even if you want to ask more, we can even do a separate video on it.
Yeah, definitely. We could do a separate video on it and learning more about the power curve and how different people's power curves look differently and how that affects their 20-minute power compared to their 5-minute power compared to their 1-minute power, for example.
Interesting stuff. Okay, so the next question is a Facebook question from Sunshine.
Okay.
So he asked, if I want to train at PowerWatts 3 to 4 times per week, what is the optimal schedule?
Okay. So most of our PowerWatts program is based around the idea that riders come twice a week. But we do put out 5 different workouts per week. So there's 3 60-minute workouts, there's a 90-minute workout, and a 2-hour workout. Not all PowerWatts centers offer the 2-hour workout, but most of them do offer the 90-minute workout in there. So there are a lot of workouts that you can choose from. So the first thing I would say to that is if you want to go from 2 times a week to 3 times a week, don't worry about optimal schedule. Whatever fits into your schedule, just do it. You know, because a lot of people, they're not professional athletes. This is not what they do full time. They have jobs, they have families. So if you say, oh, I can sneak in a 3rd time, don't worry if it's optimally scheduled or not. Just come. And in terms of what is optimal, I would say actually that what is optimal is actually a moving target, because sometimes, you know, you'll come and you'll be really feeling rested. And other times you'll come and you may have been really stressed that day, you didn't sleep the night before, so you may have been better off resting that day instead of doing your PowerWatts class, but you can't come the next day. So it's really a moving target based on your level of fatigue and based on other elements that are happening in your life. But say if we assume that all that was okay, for 3 times a week, in my experience, what I would suggest to riders is something like you come, and this might be not what everyone expects, but I would say you come 2 days in a row, then you would take 2 days off, then you would come another day, and then you would take some days off after that. So for example, especially if you have more time on the weekend, you would say come Saturday, Sunday, you take Monday, Tuesday off, or only do very light training or something off the bike. You come Wednesday, and then you would take Thursday, Friday off, or just do easy training. So now I like that approach because let's assume you're doing Saturday, Sunday. So you come in, you train hard on Saturday, you accumulate a certain amount of fatigue so that you're entering that Sunday workout with a little bit more fatigue than you're used to. So that pushes your body just that much more to access, say, different muscle fibers, or depletes your body's storage of energy more than usual. So that'll actually enhance the training effect. But if you do that, it's going to take you a little bit longer to recover from it. But so you're allowing, say, 2 days of recovery after that. So then when you come back on the Wednesday, you have pretty good energy, so you can train hard again. And then you get 2 days of recovery before the big weekend that's coming. So I find that structure works very well. We do have lots of riders that come Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Sometimes when you come Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, by the end of the week, say sometimes you might have a rough time on the Thursday or on the Saturday because you didn't have two days off in a row. And again, it depends on your lifestyle. Like if you're getting 10 hours of sleep a night, it's not a problem. But if you miss sleep one night, or you didn't eat well that day, or you had a big meeting, sometimes that not having that extra recovery doesn't allow you to fully recover and come in strong. So a lot of times if someone comes Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I would suggest on one of the 3 sessions, probably the Thursday session, that we decrease your training target a little bit so you get good training without accumulating too much fatigue, and then you'll still be strong on the Saturday session. And then if you want to come 4 times a week, on the 4 times a week, I'd suggest that you would do 2 of your workouts at full power, full intensity, and 2 of the workouts you'd actually lower the intensity. Say you'd ask the coach to bring your power down by 10 or 15%. So that way you get a really good training effect. You're working a little bit more on your endurance without accumulating large levels of fatigue by just pushing out say your 100% your threshold watts or above the threshold, depending on what the workout is that day, which can start to deplete your body. So how do you know? A good way to know is say if you do 4 PowerWatts workouts a week, and you try to say, oh, I'm going to do them all at 100%, and let's see what happens. If all of a sudden, you're just starving all the time, and then you have to snack too much. You've depleted your body a little bit too much, and then that's not going to give your body enough time to recover from the training, because the training or the workout itself depletes you. It's the recovery afterwards that builds you back up. So a single workout will deplete you, but you want your training program to enhance your fitness over time. So when you start to go 4 times a week or 5 times a week or 6 times a week, you're only going to want to choose to work hard probably on 2 of those days. And then the other days, you can still train at a reduced intensity and get tremendous fitness benefits without creating too much fatigue that you're unable to recover from afterwards. So for the 3 days a week, I'd say you could either do 2 days in a row, 2 days rest, one day, 2 days rest. Then you could do all 3 of them, I think, at 100% and be okay. If you do, say, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, that Thursday workout, you're probably going to want to bring the watts down by about 10%. And if you come 4 days a week, 2 of the workouts do at 100%, 2 of the workouts do, say, at like 85%, maybe even 80% if your aerobic system is not well developed. And that'll allow you to continue to develop over time without creating too much fatigue. So I think, what do you think, Flexus?
That covers a lot, you know,
Yeah.
and it shows that recovery is important as well in your training. So
Yeah, you have to think big picture, not just that
not
one
just
workout.
every workout is super hard.
Exactly.
So not to feel bad if you have to decrease your watts.
Yeah, it's actually good to decrease your
beneficial.
watts. Like if you can only come twice a week, don't decrease your watts. But if you can come more frequently and you wanted more exposure to the riding, definitely decrease your watts for some of those trainings, and you will benefit greatly from doing that.
Great question, Sunshine.
Thank you, Sunshine, for the question. Hopefully that answers it.
Yeah. So the next question, we're running a bit low on time.
Okay, so let's make the next one the last one.
Okay. So the next one is from Queen of Extreme and Julie.
Okay.
And it ties into Sunshine's question. So if you're training at PowerWatts twice a week, you're also training at home, what's the most beneficial weekly home smart trainer workout that you could do?
Yeah. Okay. So this kind of really does, like you mentioned, tie into what Sunshine's question was. So whether you do, if you want to do 3 or 4 workouts a week, whether you do them at home or whether you do them at PowerWatts, my answer would be similar. So if you're coming to PowerWatts twice a week and you're training hard at PowerWatts, say you're working at your 100% and pushing yourself, then that 3rd or 4th workout, say if you have specific weaknesses, for example, that aren't addressed in every PowerWatts workout, say you have trouble with climbing, you have trouble with sprinting, you have trouble with accelerations, repeat accelerations, whatever we didn't cover that week, you might want to do that at home. Or you can every week, say, do a climbing workout if climbing is a difficulty. But at the same time, don't make that workout like super difficult because we've already done the difficult training at PowerWatts. So if you're just going to ride, and I know riding at home is inherently boring, you know, we spend so much time at PowerWatts trying to make the workouts interesting. And at PowerWatts, you have a coach, you have fellow people that you're riding with, and if we're not careful, the workouts get boring at PowerWatts too. So at home, you have to be careful because if it gets boring, the only way to get out of the boredom is to train harder. You usually push harder. You try to chase somebody down on Zwift, or you do a really hard workout on Trainer Road or something like that. So to make it interesting, to keep it interesting, do what I suggested to Sunshine. Say because I know in Zwift and Trainer Road and stuff they use FTP. So if your FTP is normally set at a particular power, bring your FTP way down and load in one of the workouts and just follow the workout at a lower FTP that addresses one of the specific needs that you want to work on. Say it could be climbing, could be sprinting, could be surges if that's one of your difficulties. So, and if you're going to train at home, say like 4 times, then I would suggest what you do is ride the day before PowerWatts, but at a much reduced power. Say you ride at 70% of your normal watts and you get in a 45 to 60 minute ride. You might throw in a little surge here or there just to freshen up the legs, and that's to prepare you to enhance the level of your PowerWatts workout. But to tell you exactly what workout to do is a little difficult because it depends on what your needs are, what skill elements that you guys want to work on. But the one thing I will say is, so choose a skill element that you want to work on, reduce your power target or your calculated FTP to 90%, 85%, 80% of what it normally is, and then work on that particular skill element, not to create too much fatigue. I've seen it several times that people have smart trainers at home, and then they do a big training outside of the PowerWatts, and then they come to PowerWatts and they're unable to do to do their PowerWatts training. So, and the main reason I don't suggest that is because when you do your PowerWatts training, so we've devised the program to help you guys get to a certain level of progression, plus you're there with a coach with a specific purpose for the workout, working on specific skills. So you want to be able to do your best while you're with your coach, while you're working on these particular skill elements. Whereas those other workouts just decrease the intensity a little bit, and you can definitely still benefit substantially. Like, you don't have to train hard all the time to improve. If you train consistently and you train hard maybe twice a week and then moderately or low intensity on those other days, it's a really, really great combination, especially for people that have lives, you know, they have families, they have work commitments. You might miss sleep on one day. You might not have optimal nutrition. So think about all those things. So give yourself a break on the days that you're not intending to train hard, and then the days that you're intended to train hard, come in and really give it your best. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit, Queen of Extreme and Julie. And if you guys had more specific questions about your particular cases, because I know each of you as riders, just come ask me in class, and I can give you specific skills that I'd suggest that each of you work on. But in the general context, that would be my answer. Don't train too hard at home, especially if you're coming PowerWatts twice a week.
So we have one more question from Spring and Thor, but we'll have to address it in another video because I'm sure it's of interest to many other riders. So just their question is, they would like to have a better understanding of the pie chart in on their training profiles on myreport. Okay. So how is that? How are those percentages calculated? Why their endurance is their best? How those numbers are.
So we are going to put together a video on how to calculate that. So that's a proprietary algorithm that we developed that gives an idea of the physiological strengths and weaknesses of each rider. And there's actually two graphs. There's a pie chart that tells us the physiological underpinnings of each rider, and the other one tells you how you compare to other riders. So one of them is just how you are as a person, and the other one is how you compare to other riders. So we'll discuss each one of them. And in the video, and it's going to be a longer one so you guys really understand, we're also going to explain not only how it's calculated, but what you can do in your specific training based on what your profile looks like. Because if someone has one profile that says, yeah, you're a really strong sprinter and lead out, and someone else has really strong endurance, and both of you have the same goal. So you both have the same goal of training for a Gran Fondo, but this guy's really fast twitch explosive, this guy's slow twitch, tons of endurance, and you have the same end goal. The two of you should not be training in the exact same way. So we'll explain to you on your own, outside of your PowerWatts training, how you can go about using your rider profiles to choose what kind of workouts to get ready for the events that you guys are most interested in. So that is going to be the next video, and I'm very excited about it. Like too.
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm very excited to answer that question for Spring and Thor. So thanks so much for listening to today's Q&A, guys, and hopefully you found it interesting. If you have additional questions, we are going to be doing follow-up Q&As on PowerWatts related topics and other topics related to other elements of health and fitness that relate to your ability to ride the bike well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. And
my pleasure. Thank you, Flexus.
Guys. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you at PowerWatts.
Yes, we will.